The Russo brothers weren't too well known prior to working with Marvel, with them probably known best for directing a couple of episodes of Community. Their success with Marvel has gained them a lot of followers, me included, followers who look out for all their next projects, and their latest one to be released is The Grey Man, based off a 2009 novel of the same name. It continues their streak of working with actors that they worked with at Marvel, following on from Tom Holland with Cherry, now with Chris Evans in this film, but then again it is hard to find a big name who hasn't been in any Marvel films before. But anyway, we're not just here to talk about Marvel or just The Grey Man, but all of the Russo brothers films that they have directed. Let me know yours down below and let's get into it.
He said funky cold Medina.
I clicked onto this film expecting a harmless Owen Wilson comedy, and while some may find it exactly that, I did not enjoy sitting through this one. The film is depicted as a romantic comedy, yet there is no real romance here, only signs of a marriage falling apart. It is also depicted as a comedy, yet the comedic elements didn't make me laugh, and it doesn't really seem like they're trying to be funny at all. But why I found it so tough is because it said romantic comedy, yet it was neither of them, and it didn't really seem to know what it wanted to be. It wasn't portrayed seriously enough for it to be considered a drama, nor did the two leads have any chemistry. It tried to do the slacker turn good storyline, yet didn't commit to it, and somehow made Owen Wilson really unlikable. And you know what? Why not add in disapproving father-in-law and work troubles into the mix? It'll surely make some people laugh. For what I thought was going to be a very easy watch, Yumi and Dupree was a sloppy mess and had way too many plot lines for a film of that stature, and yeah, I just didn't find myself enjoying any part of it.
It's wonderful, I dream of you. Chips, da-ti-do-di-do, chi-boom, chi-boom-boom.
It is clear that Welcome to Collinwood is the Russo brothers' first time directing a feature-length film, as it does show inexperience yet potential. The way the characters interact is one of the strongest aspects of the films, and seeing those dynamics before the success they have had later on in their careers is interesting because a large portion of their films that have worked have contained very strong character dynamics. While the film has decent style, it lacks substance, as the film can be very convoluted and, not to mention, very unorthodox. And that's where it's clear that it's their debut, because the film just feels very odd and doesn't really feel as structured and flow like other films. And I don't think that was intentional. That's why I say it shows inexperience, because it wasn't that sort of film which was trying to be very different. The runtime is short and the story is simple, yet there's so many things added in which don't really serve any purpose than to make the film longer. So those things, it's really clear that the idea they had didn't really need to be as long as the film was, and maybe it wouldn't have made it to a feature-length runtime, who knows, but there was some things to be learnt from this one. Just like Yumi and Dupree in some kind of way, Welcome to Collinwood is too quirky to be considered a drama, but they're not quirky enough to be considered a comedy, as it was just a bit of an awkward blend of the two. As you can see by this list so far, the Russo's finest work has come when they were working with Marvel. So naturally, after their time with Marvel, people were interested to see what they would be up to after Avengers Endgame, and this is what Cherry is. Came out last year and it starred Tom Holland, and as there were a lot of new eyes watching the Russo's work, I kind of got the impression that they had a point to prove when they really didn't. They just directed a record-shattering film, and they oversaturate this film with techniques which just become really tiresome. Whether that's with narration, background details, whether it's like changing with the character's narration or in their head, even camera angles, with the most infamous one being literally from inside of Tom Holland's butt. I mentioned a trope that was used, and that was narration. Now, I'm not a big fan of narration, but I can understand why it's there. Sometimes it serves the purpose of maybe providing an insight into a person's mindset without having to show it on screen, or if it can be difficult to, or maybe providing some context for a situation. And while Cherry does do that, most of the time it's very unnecessary details or just confirming stuff that we're already seeing on screen. This is coming across quite negative, but I did actually enjoy Cherry more than most people did. The reason why the negatives shine so much though is because, as I said, expectations were high after Avengers Endgame. Even though it's a very different type of film, there were a lot of eyes on it, and even though it didn't reach the heights that I hoped it would have, I still enjoyed it and thought it was a solid film. It's just that the oversaturation of style really ruined it for me and took me out of the moments which did grab me in. I was eager to see Tom Holland in a role like this, as he was a growing star after he joined the MCU and still is to this day. It's a role that required a lot of versatility, and I thought he knocked it out of the park, even if it did feel like an 18+ Spider-Man movie at times.
I thought, man, I'd really like to fuck this girl.
I did enjoy Cherry, as I said, but at the end of the day I was frustrated. It does think it's better than it is with overuse of techniques the Russos use, and that can ultimately make it quite a long watch for some viewers who don't have the patience for it, as some of these things do drag the runtime out a bit. Fans of the spy genre will find themselves right at home with The Grey Man. It contains tropes used in Mission Impossible, Bourne, James Bond, and even John Wick, but that is also kind of part of the problem. For being Netflix's joint most expensive movie with a budget of $200 million, it doesn't actually stand out from the genre and actually is quite forgettable. The gigantic budget clearly went towards many big action sequences, and there is a lot of them, and they're all very impressive. They were definitely the best part of the film for me. The action scenes did contain drone shots, and I know there's a lot going on the internet around this, but in truth they were quite cool at first, but once you show them like 70, 80 times, it just becomes really annoying and distracting, and unfortunately that's what I found with these drone shots. While the action was somewhat memorable and pretty cool, the film as a whole still feels generic, as none of the characters have personality, with the exception of Chris Evans' Lloyd Hansen. I enjoyed The Grey Man. It delivered some really cool action, and it is just a usual spy story, but overall, given the budget and the record-breaking directors at the helm, I was a bit disappointed. I didn't make it sure, playing by the rules. I come apart. Perhaps controversial with my ranking and even my score, I appreciate Captain America: The Winter Soldier as a good film with very few flaws, but I just don't connect with it on the same level that many do. A lot of fans have this film in their top 3 MCU movies, and I get it, honestly. It is a great spy movie, and it's one of the most realistic feeling movies in the franchise. 8 years on, and it still arguably has the best hand-to-hand combat in the MCU, with scenes that are so impressive that it's actually hard to keep up with things, especially that you know that they are all practically done. The dynamic of having Cap face off against his brainwashed best friend is really engaging, and leads to some tough and emotional scenes. But what isn't talked about enough is how the Russos smoothly transitioned this character from the 40s into the modern day. And yes, he was in the Avengers film, but here, his first solo outing in the modern day. They don't make it so he's completely comfortable. There are some things where it shows that he is a man out of time, but for the most part I think this film is very important for who the character went on to be. A lot has happened in the MCU, especially recently, given that they've released about 55 hours worth of content in a whole year, so it's easy to forget how big of a deal Captain America: Civil War was. I've been a fan of the MCU from the start, but this is the point where I really started to obsess over the franchise and spend hours watching videos and theories and breakdowns of every movie that came out. It's just funny how I remember I went crazy for the Spider-Man reveal in the trailer, and now 6 years later we've had a Spider-Man trilogy of our own which brought back the old Spider-Man, and who knows, maybe his story is even concluded now. There are countless memes of Avengers destroying property, going unpunished about it, which you always assumed were just going to be swept under the rug, but Civil War makes it its mission to address that by showing that there are consequences to the Avengers' actions even if they have good intentions, and it just makes this feel much more of a real thing, as there's a political side of things involved, and also just, as I mentioned, the consequences. This leads to the separation of the Avengers, and it's a very compelling one as you understand both sides of the argument. Even when they are facing off against each other, you love all the characters that are fighting, so you hope none of them get harmed. It was refreshing to have a villain like Zemo who wasn't actually getting his hands dirty, just playing mental tricks on all of them to get them to fight against each other and break them from the inside, which he does accomplish. It really places a foot wrong, and I genuinely think this has become quite an underrated MCU movie as time has gone on, as I mentioned, because bigger things have happened. It still goes under the radar, it seems, but for me, it's one of my favourite of the MCU. Many have Avengers Infinity War as their #1 Marvel film of all time, and I understand that, but for me it just narrowly misses out. Infinity War felt like the first instance where a comic book was directly translated onto the big screen, giving us some of these wacky ideas, and all of them work. For example, we have the Avengers and the characters which haven't officially been knighted as Avengers meet up, as well as the Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, there's all space travel and some fantastic action sequences which we were very lucky to see on screen and be in the position we are today. The 2.5-hour runtime flies by as you just become so invested in everything, whether that be the action itself, as I mentioned, or just these new character dynamics, or even just the reveal of the big bad Thanos, who, while twisted, is fairly compelling with how humane he is at times, but the lengths he goes to accomplish his goals. I came into this film knowing they had announced a sequel to this Avengers film that would follow on a whole year later, but I didn't expect a shocking finale like this. It was such a punch to the gut that I didn't think the MCU would ever do. All in our minds knew that there would be some way of bringing them back for that whole year where half of our Avengers, and not to mention half the universe, had died. It was very shocking stuff and pretty dark. Quill may have been an idiot and Thor probably should have gone for their head, but I'm not complaining as it gave us our number one pick. And that pick is, of course, Avengers Endgame. Just like with my Infinity War rating, this may appear excessive for a comic book movie, and I understand that. When my movie obsession started, I may have put the Marvel films on a higher pedestal than they deserved compared to any other films, but now 2.5 years into my YouTube channel, where I've seen so many different films from many different genres, I've kind of calmed down and kept a clear mind of where these realistically should be ranked and rated. One which you may call me biased, but it just never felt right to put lower than a 99. I think I speak for many when I talk about this film, but I've never experienced anything like it. The sheer amount of emotion that I felt, especially getting to see it at the midnight premiere, was one of the best experiences of my life. Endgame delivered everything for a long-time Marvel fan like myself, whilst also just being a very good film. Everything was captivating, from the story, the characters, and even, of course, the action. While there is a lot of cliche and lazy superheroes out there, Avengers Endgame is not one of them. It is the complete opposite. It feels so grand and epic and perfects everything that it's going for. It closed out long-serving characters' stories in such a good yet emotional way. It was no surprise that a film like this was the highest grossing movie of all time for a solid 5 minutes, I'd say. If you haven't gathered by this review, this is my favourite film of all time. I know that may annoy many, but even with my changed mindset, I still love this film 3000. That concludes my ranking of all 8 Russo brother films. Please let me know yours down below. I'm interested to see. I've seen a few comments about what's happened with my MCU content, and it's something I'd like to address. It's no surprise that the MCU is a very big franchise, and it's gotten to the stage where they need to pump out content every month or so. And with that, it makes my life difficult, as every few months I'll have to make an MCU ranking, which is about 30 movies long, and that's just a lot of effort, time, commitment, time which I don't always have. What I'm doing these days, like most recently Thor Love and Thunder, if the film has other movies of the same title like Thor did, I'll just do a ranking of those films and you can hear my thoughts on that Marvel movie that came out. But for example, something like Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which is set to come out in the next few months, I would probably do an MCU ranking with all the massive films, because, you know, there's only one other Black Panther film, and you'll hear my thoughts for Thor Love and Thunder in that as well. It just feels a bit pointless having to make that same video every few months, as it's just a lot of effort, and not to mention it kind of does take away from the chance of covering other stuff. I know Marvel content will probably get more views than the other stuff, but I want to talk about as much as I can. I feel like constantly making these big MCU rankings, it just kind of blocks off that chance, and if I did that, I just feel very unsatisfied. But yeah, that's just a little update. And by the way, with my Jordan Peele ranking, I was ready to cover it today or the next few days, but I checked and the UK release date of Nope didn't line up with the American one, and in fact, it actually comes out on August the 12th, which is when I'm on holiday in Italy, so I don't know what will happen with that. I'm definitely going to do it, whether that be in a month's time or a couple of weeks, but stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next one.